Hello and welcome, distinguished enemies and most esteemed rivals. Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Kelly. We're here to talk about books. We're back to a classic couch video today because the puppies are actually sleeping for once, and that happens about once a month. And if I get up and go to my office for too long, they will get up, follow me, bring bones, chew on them, and it will be loud. So, the aesthetic is off. So anyway, we're here to talk about all the books that I've read so far this year. I don't read quite enough, at least I didn't in the last 3 months, per month to justify a monthly wrap-up, so I figured we'll do quarterly. I entered this year in a little bit of a slump. I don't remember why, but I did. So we started off with a little, does this qualify as a short story? I don't know if this is even long enough to be a novella. It's like 112 pages or something like that, 115. This is Daughter of the Sea by Berlie Doherty, and it is a middle grade book about a Selkie child who gets adopted by a childless couple. And of course, per Selkie mythology, spends her life pining for the sea. This book is really weird. It's very gray. It's very stormy and bleak. And I loved it. It feels, the way that it's written, it feels like you are sitting in a mead hall being told a story by a master storyteller. It's just, it has that simple folktale feeling to it. It has some very interesting dark undertones. It's a good one. I was looking for more Selkie stories because they're kind of rare and a little bit hard to find. And this was one that came up when I was looking. It's a little bit haunting. The next book I read was a book that I read for work. This book is The Summer Book by Tove Jansson. She is the creator of the Moomins. Is that what they're called? The little hippopotamus guys? Yes, the Moomins. But this book is not like that. I mean, I don't actually know what the Moomin stories are about. Maybe they are haunting and strange and twisted. I don't know. But the summer book is about a girl and her grandmother who stay on this island over the summer. The girl's father is there too, but he is almost part of the setting more than he is an actual character. And the story is just a collection of vignettes. It's very much a nothing happens kind of story. The girl and her grandmother, I don't remember her name. The book is really about their relationship and the way that they navigate their love for each other, each other's fears, each other's limitations. It's just weird. It's strange. It's a little bit creepy, some of the descriptions, and the setting is, it's another very bleak, very gray kind of book. The writing is so lyrical and beautiful and strange. The descriptions are so strange. Grandmother is an artist, and the art that she creates, I want one. She makes these carvings, and they seem so creepy and weird, and I want one. I feel like I just said nothing about this book, but it really is a nothing happens story. But it stuck with me so much. I don't usually count books that I read for work toward my reading goals unless they really, really strike me. I've only ever included 2, one last year and one so far this year. It has stuck with me. I think about it pretty regularly. Oh, it was so good. Next, I read The Last Wish, which is kind of the first book in the Witcher series, kind of 0.5. It's listed as number 0.5. But it is a collection of short stories that kind of introduces you to the world of Witcher. If you're familiar with Witcher at all, then you already know this. I really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot. I've watched the show, and I had watched both seasons that are out now. I watched both of them before I read this. I've also observed some of the video game. My boyfriend plays it. So I was familiar with like the world, the characters, the basics of what's happening, but obviously the book is always different. What struck me really with these books was that they're way more fairy tale influenced than I realized. I'm sure that is not a surprise to most people, but somehow I didn't really know that. You get a little bit of that in the show, but not really, not to the level that it is here, where like some of these short stories are just straight up, wow. Some of these stories are just straight up fairy tale retellings, and I wasn't expecting that, and I was very pleasantly surprised. Yeah, I really did enjoy it. I do. I have 2 complaints, which I'm not surprised about. I kind of expected them just based on what I know of the series already. One being that they're a little bit sexist. There's a little bit, we can stop talking about women's breasts a little bit. And also, some of the writing is a little, and I don't know if this might be a result of the translation, because these are originally in Polish, but some of the writing is a little bit like, okay, you think you're very clever, I get it. Mostly not a problem. It's just here and there. There were a couple of lines that I was like, okay, yeah, I get it. But yeah, definitely going to be continuing the series. I have sort of Song of Destiny. Something of Destiny, whatever the next one is. What is it? It's right here. Sword of Destiny, which is listed way down on this list. I don't know what order you're supposed to read these books in. If anyone who really is familiar with the series knows the answer to that question, what one am I supposed to read next? Am I supposed to read Blood of Elves, or am I supposed to read Sword of Destiny? Because this and Sword of Destiny came in a box set together, so I thought you were supposed to read them one after the other. But I don't know, and I've looked online and everything says something different. So tell me what to do, internet, please, and thank you. Next up, I read On Writing and Worldbuilding, Volume 1 by Timothy Hickson. Tim is a YouTuber. He runs the channel Hello Future Me, and everything in this book, this is kind of just a different delivery of a lot of stuff that he talks about in his videos. I believe there are also, like, he expands on a couple of points and there are some extra examples and things like that, but it's mostly a lot of the same stuff, which I knew going in. He's very transparent about that, but I wanted to be able to annotate them and whatever, because I love his videos. I love his writing advice, and the stuff that he talks about has been very helpful for me. I'm very picky. I had a couple like little mini breakthroughs reading it. He really delves into specifics in these books. Like it's not just like the basics of plot structure and like the same writing advice that you get everywhere on the internet and in every writing book. It's specific. He has a chapter on how empires rise and villain motivation, foreshadowing, the chosen one, final battles, very specific things, and really gets into what works and what doesn't, the exceptions to rules. That is just so much more helpful than being like, show don't tell for the millionth time, like, So yeah, I loved this. I definitely will be using this as a reference. I took a bunch of notes and stuff. Good. That was all that I read in January. February started out with Searching for Dragons, which is the second book in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, which is a middle grade fantasy series. I listened to the audiobook for book 1 last year, and I really liked it. It was very sweet. It was such an ode to the fantasy genre, very genre aware, where like the characters kind of know that they're in a fantasy story and they're like, well, princesses have to do this. Book 2 was cute, but it didn't have the same charm for me that the first one did. I think the series has like 5 books. I'm not going to keep reading them. But if you have like an 8-year-old in your life, I would give them this series. It's very sweet and it's very digestible, and it is really such a love letter to fantasy. Next, I finished Return of the King. This book was everything. I made a video about it. I'll have it. I can never remember which corner it goes in. I cried like a baby. I love these books. I can't wait to reread them. I don't have anything new to say. Just go watch my other video where I'm freaking out about it. The next book that I read this year was Lirael by Garth Nix. This is book 2 in the Porson series or Old Kingdom series. I've seen it listed as both on different places. I don't know what's right or if it matters. This series, I feel so conflicted about, because there's nothing about it that really, like, I'm not enthralled by it. I don't think it's incredible. But there's just something about it. I think about it. I remember it very clearly. It's kind of just lodged in there. I think it's just because it's quite different, at least from anything that I've read before. There's something about it that feels a little dark academia to me. I don't know why. By definition, probably not. Anyway, this story takes place in a world where there's this wall, and on one side of the wall, there is like the the new kingdom, and on the other side is the old kingdom, and in the old kingdom there's magic and etc. And the main character of the first book, Sabriel, is the Abhorsen, which means that she is basically in charge of protecting the realm from necromancy. She sort of guards the veil between life and death. I don't really understand the lore of these books very well, but the book 2 takes place later, and we're following a different character, Lirael, who is a member of this order of seers, basically, but she doesn't have the sight. She's supposed to be getting it any day now, but it never seems to come. And she ends up taking a job in the library so that she can kind of have something to do while she waits for her sight to kick in. And I didn't really like Lirael. I thought she was kind of whiny. I thought she was kind of meh. I just didn't love her. But I also didn't mind. She was kind of unlikable. But I just, whatever. And there is another point of view character who is Sabriel's son. And I loved him. He was so fun. And the animal companions in this book, same as in the first book, incredible, amazing, so funny. The best part, like, just awesome. And I love the world building. There's just something about it. It's so, I don't know what it is, but I like it. I just like it. I'm going to be here forever. The next book was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. I really liked this book. Ever since I read Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, I've wanted something like that. And this book is the closest that I've come to having that. It's that same, like, winter Russian folklore, kind of slow sort of story, but there's a coziness to it as well. The Russian folklore influence is, it's so homey and good, and also sort of wild and primal. I love it. I do think the main character is, like, the weakest link, like, kind of the least compelling part of it, which is a shame because I think she's supposed to be very interesting and compelling. So maybe it's just me, but I don't love her, but it doesn't really affect my enjoyment of the story that much. I gave it 4.25 stars on Storygraph, so clearly I very much liked it. But yeah, this is also a very slow story. There's a plot, but it's tenuous. Like, it's just not really as important as the prose and the atmosphere and the world building and the strangeness. Oh, you're gonna snore now. Good. I'll go give him a pet. He might stop. It didn't work. He's still snoring, but it's okay. It's cute, right? It's cute. Ambiance. Back to The Bear and the Nightingale. That was all that I had left to say. The next book that I read, my last February book, was The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a book I've had on my radar ever since I read The Raven Boys, which I was obsessed with. And it was one of those things, I just never really got around to it. I think part of the reason it took me so long to get to it was because I read Shiver by Maggie Stiefvater, and I really didn't like it. And I was very surprised that I didn't like it after how much I loved The Raven Boys. So I think it kind of made me nervous to pick up anything else by her, which is dumb, but I so loved The Scorpio Races. It is almost perfect, and it is the best of Maggie Stiefvater. I feel from my experience with her that her strong points are character, atmosphere, and prose. And The Scorpio Races, that's what this book is. It's the beautiful prose. The atmosphere is unbelievable. So immersive. I really like bleak books because this one is too. It's very bleak. It's very gray. And I loved it. It's just misty and quiet and odd. And then the characters are so good. The characters and the character relationships, unreal. The plot, it's there. It's just kind of not the most important thing. But I love that. I love a good, like, slow kind of, it's not really meandering. It's just that we're so much more focused on the characters and the character relationships than on the plot itself. And I'm cool with that. So anyway, if you're not familiar, the premise of this book is that on the Isle of Thisbe, which is where Puck, our main character, lives, there are these horses that live in the water, and they're water horses. They're based on the Kelpies of Celtic mythology. And they are vicious, evil monsters. I mean, they're not, but they are. They will eat people, they will kill people, and every year in November, the island holds a race wherein people ride these horses. I just don't even know where to begin. My horse girl heart was glowing. It was so good. The sibling relationships, the romantic relationships. Sean Kendrick. Oh, he hurts my heart. And now for the March books. I started off with The Tradition by Jericho Brown. This is a poetry book about race, sexuality, identity. It was so good. I listened to the audiobook. It was less than 2 hours. It was like an hour and a half, maybe. The narrator, J.D. Jackson, was so incredible. The way that he read these poems, I could hear the punctuation. I could hear the line breaks. And I feel like that is so rare. So few people, even narrators often, don't really know how to read poetry. And he just did such a beautiful job. The poetry itself is so gorgeous. I don't read a lot of poetry. It's not something I'm really drawn to, but this one, it was so good. It was so powerful. Highly recommend. It's a very quick listen, and I would recommend listening to it because, wow, Jackson did an amazing job. Here's the first bummer. She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I hated it. I'm sorry. I know this one is pretty beloved, but I didn't care for it at all. I thought the writing was, I don't want to be mean, but I thought the writing was bad. Near the beginning, there was a straight up, I don't think I've ever read, and as you know, Bob, so glaringly in your face as this one. It was literally may I remind you about your entire backstory while you sit here in front of me, because that makes sense. And I was like, what is happening? I just didn't sympathize with any of them. I didn't find the characters compelling. I didn't care. About any of it. I think that whoever wrote the blurb for this book did a real disservice by comparing it to the Song of Achilles, because it is compared to that in the blurb. And I just think that was a huge mistake, because the Song of Achilles is so magnificently written. The prose is unreal beautiful. I think about that book and I just see gold and green, and I can picture their faces, and I can see the places that they go, even Achilles' tent. It's so atmospheric and it's so grounded in the world that it's in. It's so poetic and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And this book, the prose, there were moments where it was mostly fine, and then there were moments where it was bad. It certainly wasn't a consistent strength. And then the romance in the Song of Achilles is transcendent. And if you take the romance out of that book, it changes there wouldn't be a story. That's the whole, it is a romance. Among other things, but that, and in this book, the romance was incidental. It didn't change anything. If you took it out, it wouldn't change anything, and I would have been spared the very uncomfortable sex scene that was very abrupt and alarming. It just came out of absolutely nowhere. It was all of a sudden we're in the middle. I was like, what is going on? And I was just, I hated it. I'm sorry. I really did. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. Okay. Total 180. The next book that I read was Seer of Sevenwaters. I said this on my Instagram as well when I finished this series. I didn't expect to have a contender for favorite series so quickly after finishing Lord of the Rings. But these books, I'm now no longer sure that I can choose between them. Like, Lord of the Rings is more masterful, for sure. But these, I think my just gut love of them is at least equal. These books, this is book 5 in the series. They follow a family who lives at Sevenwaters. It's in Ireland. It's a historical fantasy based in Ireland with a lot of Irish folklore, mythology, all that incorporated into it. These books, they're generational, and each book follows a different character, which usually I don't care for. In these books, I just love it. I feel like I know this family so well. I feel like I'm part of this family. You come to understand the complexities of the family and the way that they work, all of those places that are like uncomfortable, and the different individual relationships between these characters. It's just they're so good. They're so immersive. They're so mysterious and strange, and there's so much of the like uncanny happening, and yet they are also so comfortable, and they feel like home. Like, they feel, I don't think since Hogwarts have I ever felt so at home in a book. I love these books. And book 5 specifically, Seer of Sevenwaters, follows, I believe the correct pronunciation is closer to Shipple. I'm not sure, but I call her Sybil in my brain, which I know is wrong. She is a seer, and her gift is very overwhelming to her. So she is sent to an island where another of her family members trains a bunch of fighters to do stuff. There's a mystery. There's a really gorgeous romance. I don't know what to say, especially starting with book 5. Like, there's so much that it's like just trying to describe book 5 is like nearly impossible. But I can't recommend these books enough. And almost everyone I know who's read them, it's like shot to the top of their list. It's like among their absolute favorite books. So I'm just saying to read them. Next up, I read The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander. This is the first book in the Chronicles of Prydain series, which is the series that the Disney movie The Black Cauldron was based on. I have always loved that movie. I think it is an underrated masterpiece. I was obsessed with it as a kid. I got it from my local library and just fell in love. And this book, how do I describe this book? It is classic fantasy in just such a fun and good way. It's like, it feels in a lot of ways almost cliche. Obviously, I mean, it's older. It was published in the 60s. I assume when it was written, it probably wasn't as like cliche as it is now. But everything that's cliche about it, it doesn't feel like, it's not, oh, this is so tired and whatever. It feels so earnest and honest, and like, it's just that typical, like, literally, the main character is a pig keeper. He is a farm boy who gets this destiny thrust upon him, and it's just so cute. And I'm reading book 2 right now. I started it, and it's just so fun. And if you want like an easy fantasy read that is also just quintessentially so fantasy, these ones. They are middle grade in the best way. Middle grade really has so many incredible gems, so many good writers, so many incredible writers write middle grade. it's cute. It's good. Like, earnestly, honestly, just a delight. I loved it. Next was another audiobook. I listened to Mary, Queen of Scots by Antonia Fraser. It was 25 hours long. It is a biography of Mary, Queen of Scots. And it was really, I've always thought Mary was, like, kind of cool. She's just one of those historical figures that I'm kind of drawn to. And I was listening to Dana Schwartz's podcast, Noble Blood, and she did an episode on Mary. And my best friend had just been listening to a history book about the Romanovs, which are kind of that kind of historical thing for her that she's very drawn to. And she loved the book that she listened to. And so I was like, I'm going to listen to a history book. Like, I'm just going to do it. It'll be out of my comfort zone. And so I was Googling, like, books about Mary, Queen of Scots. And this one came up. I was like, oh, this is a good one if you're, like, actually interested in her life. Because there are a lot of, people will focus on maybe, like, her love life or, like, different aspects of it. And it was like, if you're interested in, like, her life, this is the one. And I was like, great. And that was a mistake. It was very informative. I learned a ton. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that it was a biography and a history book. And that's just not, I shouldn't have gone there. I should have done something else. It was just a lot of information and very dry, that's fine. That's how these books are. So I was on me. This is totally on me. As a resource, as an actual history book and actual biography, great. If you're just someone like me and you think Mary, Queen of Scots is kind of neat, maybe go elsewhere. Next, I listened to The Girl in the Tower, which is the sequel to The Bear and the Nightingale. I very much liked this book. Some of the side characters from book 1 come back in really satisfying ways. And those characters are, like, more complicated this time around, which is fun. And there are some new characters that were really fun. One of the villains is, like, really fun to hate. The world gets expanded, all kinds of good stuff. I did find I missed some of the homier magic from the first book. The first book is focused more so on that domestic magic, the domovoi and the oven, kind of like these household spirits. They play a bigger role in the first book than they do in this one, and I did kind of miss them because I prefer that to the broader, more like nebulous magic that comprises kind of what is the more important magic of the book that actually plays a bigger role in the plot, which is fine. That's just a preference thing. My other one thing with these books is that the main character, what is her name? Vazia. Vazia is, like I said, when I was talking about The Bear and the Nightingale, I don't like her that much. I think she's somehow manages to be a little bit bland, at least to me, but she's regularly described all through the first book. It is constantly said she is not pretty. She's maybe a little interesting looking, but she's not pretty. She's actually, a lot of people call her ugly. And in book 2, still, there is this emphasis on her not being beautiful. But then in book 2, particularly, it happens a little bit in book 1, but particularly in book 2, all of these men, I mean, first of all, just the fact that there are so many of them, but also that they are described as being, like, so gorgeous. And they're mostly men that have a lot of power. And so, like, they're men that could kind of have anybody, and they're obsessed with her. Like, obsessed with her. Like, one of them is, like, big Count Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, like, big that guy vibes. And, like, that level of just so enthralled with her. And I think it's supposed to be because, well, first of all, she's, like, prettier than she thinks she is, which is annoying. But also, I think that it's supposed to be because she's supposed to be very interesting and intriguing, and as a person, like, she's very different from the other girls. I feel like I'm doing these books a disservice by talking about them like this, but because they are very good and I really liked them, but it is just like every time that these men would be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what she's doing to me, I was just like, shut up. Like, I don't know, it just was a little much. That was a little much for me. I actually rated this one a little bit lower than the first one, which I do think feels right for me. I feel like most people like each of these books more than the last, but for me, I think it was just the atmosphere and the tone of book 1 were more my taste than this one. But that's not really a criticism of book 2. It's just again, it's just a preference thing. But I do like these books. I feel like I am doing a bad. That's the thing. Okay, look, when I like books, I'm more bothered by the things that bother me, because I'm like, you were so close to being like amazing, but these couple of things like are really holding me back, and so they bother me more. So I'm more likely to talk about them, which then makes them sound like I didn't like them as much. I did, and you should read them if they sound good. We're back to Sevenwaters, because that was the next book that I read. This is the last book in the series. Juliet Marillier has no right to make me feel the way that she makes me feel. The amount of times, I mean, I've gotten this throughout the series, but this book particularly, I would be reading and I would come across a sentence and I would get chills. Like I would feel all of the hair on my head standing up. My friend Megan, that I did a buddy read of this series with, said it so aptly. When we finished this last book, she said something along the lines of, it's impossible to describe these books in a way that does them justice to someone who hasn't read them. And I think that she's right. Like, I could tell you about the first book. I could give you a premise of the first book. But even that, like, it wouldn't encapsulate everything that it is. Like, the first book is a retelling of the Six Swans fairy tale. And it has the Irish influence. It takes place in Ireland. And the main character is a very quietly strong young woman who goes through something absolutely unimaginable for the love of her brothers. Great. That is so inadequate as a description of what this series actually is at its heart. And then part of the problem too is that right at the very end, my friend Megan and I, we realized something about what these books are about that kind of sneaks up on you. And so I can't even say it because I'd be giving it away. So I need more people to read these and talk about them because they are better than anything. I should have maybe just gone out of order and done Sevenwaters last because these next two are a little bit underwhelming. The next book I read was Black Sun. I listened to the audiobook. I really didn't like it. I feel like I read a different book than everybody else did. I didn't care. Whole book, White Room Syndrome. I never felt grounded in any of the settings. Like, there were details described, both of characters and of settings, but they weren't the kind of details that then allowed me to create the whole scene or the whole character in my head. So I had no concept of what anybody looked like, what any setting looked like. I didn't feel grounded there at all. I didn't, like, the politics, the religion, the society, the social structures, like all of that stuff was clearly so intricate and well thought through. Rebecca Roanhorse obviously did a lot of work developing those things, and you can feel that throughout the book, that those things are very well developed and they're very strong. But the characters are weak, underdeveloped, have very little agency. Like, through the whole thing, I was just like, things are just happening to these people. Like, and then when there are multiple point of view characters, but I felt like every time one of the point of view characters did make a decision, we were seeing it through the lens of a different point of view character who was then just having that thing happen to or around them. And so it still felt like these characters are not making decisions because you're in the head of someone who is not making a decision. Like, I just didn't like it. I didn't like it. The prose itself was, like, fine, but because there was so much missing from the description and so much missing from the character development, it's like, that's not enough either. Like, I really didn't like it. And I know people are excited about the representation in this book. There's a lot of queer characters and non-binary characters and people of color and everything, but that doesn't make up for everything else that's wrong with it. I really didn't like it. I really didn't like it. Sorry. And then finally, the last book that I've read so far this year is The Deep by Rivers Solomon, which is a book about... This is a book about mermaids who were originally birthed from pregnant slaves who were thrown overboard during ocean crossings. And it is very heavy. And there's a lot to think about. It's very short. It's a little under 200 pages. there's so much discussion happening. It's exploring identity, race, sexuality, community, generational trauma. It's very good. It's very good. And there's a lot going on. On like aside from that stuff, as on like a storytelling level, it wasn't really like for me. So I feel a little middle of the road about it because I'm like, this is an important story. The concept, these mermaids, and the way that their society works, it's so interesting. It's so cool. But it was a taste thing. It was like, I didn't, the writing itself, like the prose, there was nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't to my taste. There were a couple of things that happened that I was like, what? And we also spent a little too much time discussing the mechanics of mermaid sex. Like, a little bit would have been fine because, like, we are discussing, like, relationships, etc., family, etc. So it makes sense, but it was like, I feel like we came back to it, like, several times. I was like, this is only 200 pages. Like, why are we spending so much real estate on this? I don't understand. But yeah, it was good. I recommend it, certainly. And I think that most people would probably enjoy it also more than I did. It really was just like a taste thing. But yeah, the story itself really, like, that's the point of it, right? Like, it was the discussion and the concept and the kind of what are we doing with this story that was important. So that's that. All right, very quick now because I've been talking for an hour. But these are some of my stats for this year. So I so far have read 18 books. I'm actually ahead of where I was last year. Last year I read 100 books. This year I was only trying to read 50 because I thought I wouldn't get to as many. But I'm ahead of where I was last year. So I don't know if that'll continue. But for now, I have read mostly adventurous, emotional, reflective, and mysterious books, as well as challenging, which is not usually like that slice in my of all time books is pretty small. So that's pretty interesting, I think. I'm actually very surprised at how there's only one book has been dark, which is shocking because that's generally one of my biggest pie slices on here. So far this year, most of the books have been medium paced with a not insignificant slow chunk. Not surprising. I'm definitely moving toward slow books in general. I tend to feel more attached to them than, I mean, I love a good fast-paced book, I do, but the ones that really stick with me tend to be the slow ones, and I think I've been gravitating a lot more toward that recently. Mostly shorter books this year so far, under 300. I don't think that will continue the rest of the year. The vast majority of books that I want to read are a lot longer, but getting out of a reading slump, you gotta read some short ones. Fiction versus nonfiction. This one, a very significant nonfiction chunk for me anyway. I don't really read that much nonfiction in general, but that writing book, the history book, I think poetry is considered nonfiction on Storygraph as well, which does make sense, at least in this case. But yeah, 17% so far. I do imagine that will go down significantly through the rest of the year, but then there's my genre chart, which is incredibly predictable. Fantasy being almost all of the books, 14 out of 18 have been fantasy. Historical has been rising quickly up my list. Mostly those are historical fantasies, things like Daughter of the Sea, Sevenwaters books, of course. Those are historical. Followed by LGBTQIA+ books, which all of those were from March. And two of them I hated, but that's still cool. And then young adult, I am again not surprised that young adult is actually falling. For me, young adult in my overall charts is second, I believe, my second most read genre, but I am gravitating toward it less and less. I tend to be DNFing a lot of young adult that I read or rating it lower. It's just become not so much my taste anymore. There are exceptions, of course, and a lot of young adult is really beautiful, but it's just kind of become something I'm not as drawn toward anymore. Only a couple classics this year. 2 short stories already. 2 short story books is actually kind of a lot for me. I don't tend to really read short stories, but I guess one of them was for work, and one of them was the first in a long fantasy series. So that does check out. All right, as far as format, half of the books I've read have been physical, 44% audio, and 6% digital. I don't really read a lot of ebooks. I don't have an e-reader or anything. It's just once in a while, if I'm stuck somewhere and I'm like, oh, I forgot a book, I'll quick download something on Hoopla on my phone or on Libby. So far, my only repeat authors this year have been Katherine Arden and Juliet Marillier, with 2 books for each of them. And my average rating so far has been a 4.01, which is very good. I think I'm getting pretty good at figuring out ahead of time what kind of books I'm gonna like, and that's very cool. So that's it. That's what I've read so far this year. That's my first quarterly wrap-up of 2022, also ever, because I have not made one of these before. Next time I'll be in front of a bookshelf, and I'll look nice, probably. But, you know, let me know down below what you are reading. What have you read this year? How's your reading going this year? Do you have goals? Are you reaching them? Are you hitting them? If not, you should feel really terrible about yourself. You should not feel terrible about yourself. That's a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke. Thanks for sticking around. This was probably really long because I've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes. So sorry about that. But you can follow me on Instagram. I have an Instagram. I have a bookstagram. And there I do mini reviews in my stories for every book that I read. And I post content sometimes more than here, probably by like 2%. And yeah, that's all. Thanks for watching and for not complaining about my snoring dog. And like and subscribe, I guess. So loud. Come here.